Gospel lesson this morning is from Mark chapter 9, beginning at the 30th verse. Jesus and the disciples went on and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Here ends the gospel. Please be seated. So for those of you who are old enough, do you remember what you were doing, or do you remember the event that happened on August 16th, 1977? There's one. I remember exactly what I was doing. It was a hot August day, and I was helping my dad strip cotton. In those days, we had to pitchfork the cotton in the trailer and stomp around on it. And so I was excited to get to actually pull the trailer to town, because I'd get in the pickup and turn on the air conditioning and turn on the radio. Well, that day when I did that, I got in there, and some of you already know what I heard on the radio. It was a sad day. Elvis Presley had died at the age of 42. Y'all remember that now? Sad day. I think I almost wrecked the truck because I couldn't believe it. You know, I read some stories on Elvis, and I just recently saw a TV show, maybe y'all have seen that, where they were talking to some of Elvis's closest friends and his relatives. I caught the tail end of it, and the person talking was his stepbrother, David. And David said that on August 14th, 2 days before Elvis died, he went to Graceland, and Elvis was kind of laying in bed, and there was a bunch of reading material out on the bed, and his Bible was open. And when Elvis saw David, he asked David, "Who am I?" And David kind of chuckled. He said, "Well, Elvis, everybody knows who you are. You're the king." But Elvis said, "No, I'm not the king. There's only one king, and that's Jesus Christ who's in heaven." Elvis went on to tell David some things, and when David looked back on it, it was clear that Elvis knew he was very close to meeting his Lord and Savior. Whatever you think about Elvis, and at the end of his life it was tragic, the abuse of the prescription drugs, but Elvis was deeply spiritual, and he wrote many, or didn't write them, but he sang many gospel music over the years. Well, in last week's gospel lesson, Jesus asked Peter a similar question to what Elvis asked David. And I'm paraphrasing. Jesus said, "Who am I?" Of course, Peter said, "Well, you're the Messiah." But Jesus knew that Peter and the rest of the disciples really didn't know who Jesus was. Because later on, Jesus said, "I must be crucified, I will die, and later on be risen." And then Peter rebuked him for it. Today is a continuation of that story. Jesus again is telling them that I must be persecuted, I must be killed, crucified, and in 3 days I will rise again. Again, the disciples didn't understand who he was or what he was saying. Because what were they doing? They were arguing amongst themselves who was going to be the greatest in this physical kingdom. I can imagine them saying, "I'm going to be on his right side, or I'm going to be the best, I'm going to have the most." You know, the truth is, the disciples' ambition for greatness and gain got in the way of them realizing who Jesus was. And sadly today that happens to a lot of us, doesn't it? You know, we're in constant pursuit of things of this world and recognition that leaves us empty and hollow and broken inside. Our passions, ambitions, possessions, and pride, these are all dead things. When we try to get life out of dead things, the result is only weariness and dissatisfaction. Let me read you something from 1 John chapter 2. And John is talking about the love of the world. John says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of the eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever." And what did Jesus tell the disciples this morning, or in the gospel lesson that we read? He said these words, which are hard: "If you want to be first in my kingdom, you must be last and have the heart of a servant." That goes against the world's teaching today. So, is it wrong that we have ambition in this life and that we desire to be looked upon as a person that's good and have status in the community, maybe to have some material wealth, to achieve good things in our professional and personal life? Well, it's not necessarily bad, but if we let those things cloud our minds and hearts for the real Jesus, and we place that desire first in our life, then the answer is definitely yes. You know, our natural desires and pride of this life, they actually become lust of the flesh, and love for this world pushes God out of our lives. Don't love this world. It's passing away. Don't love this world so that you can find moments of satisfaction that will not last. I want to come down now this morning because I want to get a little personal, if that's okay. I have a question. How much time during the week do you spend with Jesus? How much time do you spend pursuing Christ? Is it only just a few fleeting moments? Maybe it's only these few hours we're here at church. If that question bothers you and convicts you, you're not alone. I myself, at times, feel like, oh Lord, it's been several days and I haven't given you hardly any thoughts. And I feel bad about that. So how is it that we can overcome this? How is it we can overcome the ambitions that we have and do what Jesus says and really want to be last? Well, let me tell you a story. It's kind of a funny story, but it illustrates what we need to do. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of attending a service at a big church, and they had a visiting pastor. His name was Pastor Willie George. He doesn't own, but he pastors a big church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I don't know if some of you have heard of Willie George, but they really call him Gospel Bill. Back in the 80s and 90s, Gospel Bill had a very good television Christian show. He called it The Adventures of Dry Gulch. And it was set back in the Western days. It was kind of a comical thing, but it was a good teaching show, and he had a youth program that went along with it. Well, Gospel Bill moved on from that, and he was doing some preaching that day. And he told us a story about when he was a youth pastor just starting in Odessa, Texas. He said he went to the first few services and he realized the youth there just were not engaged. He said he didn't really know if they knew what it meant to be a Christian, so he decided to do something about it. So for a few Sundays, he took the youth and had their own service. Well, he came up with this idea to have a skit. And it was pretty elaborate. And he got some volunteers. And what he did, he set up an operating table, and he put a sheet over it. He dressed up in a doctor's outfit, and he had a fellow come in, and of course he had a nurse assistant. And the fellow came up to him and said, "Doctor, I can't be a Christian. I don't know what it takes." And so Dr. Bill said, "Oh, we can fix that." He said, "You need an operation." So he laid him on the table. He went behind that little curtain on the table. He had a saw, and I guess he started sawing on something that sounded like bone. He had made up a bottle of fake blood. The nurse started squirting the blood, blood squirting everywhere, and he's sawing away. He said those kids' eyes and the youth got about that big. They were engaged now. So he kept on, and then finally he said, "Oh, here's your problem." And he digs around, and he pulls up this bloody, huge rock. He said, "Your problem is your heart is a rock. It's hardened." And of course, the guy, which he wouldn't be, he looks up from his gurney and says, "Can you fix it?" And Gospel Bill says, "Yes, we can." Now, I don't know where he went to get this, but he went and got a real pig's heart. And he said, "I'll fix it. Here's a new heart." So he goes back, and he's doing his thing, and blood is squirting everywhere. And finally, it's over with. The guy gets up, and he now says, "Yes, I now know what it's like to be a Christian. I have a new heart." Now, that's a funny way to explain it. But the truth is, we all need that operation. The disciples, their heart was hardened. Sometimes ours is. And God performs an operation and changes our hard hearts to a soft one. But that can only happen when we do like what James said in our epistle lesson this morning. He said, submit yourself to Christ, and that will happen. And as I said a few Sundays ago, when that happens, we become a new creation in our spirit. Our physical bodies are still the same, but we're a new creation. Now, I know that still is hard to do sometimes. I think today, especially today, we still have things that get in the way. And one of them that I think is really prevalent now is we all want to be accepted. We want acceptance with our peers, our coworkers, our friends, even our church family, and of course our immediate family. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be. I know with today's youth, it can actually result in tragic things. The kids want to be accepted in their schools with their friends, and when they're not, and they're bullied, the results sometimes are very tragic. I do want to share a story with you this morning. It's a story of acceptance, and then I'm going to summarize everything. And it's a story of Tukey. Tukey was born in a Korean family. The Korean culture, especially non-Christian, if someone was born that didn't look exactly like the rest of the family, they were persecuted. The family was persecuted. It was awful. It was so bad that a lot of the mothers did the unthinkable, and they took the child's life when they were young. Now, the mother of Tukey decided to keep her. And for the first 7 years of Tukey's life, it wasn't good. The whole family suffered. They were persecuted. She was discriminated against, persecuted against. You see, Tukey looked a little different. She didn't have the long, straight black hair. She had curly, blonder-looking hair. And that was the only reason. But her mother, finally at the age of 7, had enough, and she did the unthinkable. she pushed Tookie out of the house into the streets, banished her from the family. For the next 2 years, Tookie spent living on the streets. Finally, at the age of 9, she found her way to an orphanage, and it was there she had some stability. Well, one day at the orphanage, there was a buzz because they had found out that a Christian couple from the United States was coming to adopt one of the boys. So Tookie helped the staff get the boys all looking as good as they could and cleaned them up. And the day finally came, and the couple came in, and it was a large man, and he would go up to each child, and he would pick that child up, and big tears would be running down his face. And he would do that with each child. And you can only imagine that if he could, he would have adopted every child there. When he got to the last one, he saw Tookie out of the corner of his eye. Now, you have to understand, Tookie didn't look very good. She was a 9-year-old, barely weighed 30 pounds, scarred up, lice in her hair. She was a mess. But that man walked straight over to Tookie and said, "I want you to be my daughter." And that's exactly what happened. Tookie went with the family back to the United States, became a Christian herself. That's acceptance. That's a good acceptance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeking acceptance sometimes in the wrong places. You see, there's only one acceptance that we need to worry about, and that's God. And He accepts us no matter what. He accepts us from just looking at us from our scars, our sinful self, our ugliness. And through Jesus Christ, He comes to each and every one of us and says, "I want you to be my son. I want you to be my daughter." And when we say yes, we become part of His family. It's a wonderful thing. Yvonne is going to start playing a song that we have in our hymnal.